When Janet first approached me about giving this talk this morning, she said that they were relying on saints from the church. Now, those of you who know me would never call me saintly. Those who do not know me probably wonder why I wear this ridiculous bow tie. When I was born, my father was pastor of a Lutheran church in an inner city German ghetto in Baltimore, Maryland. I went to college at a tiny Lutheran college in Southwest Virginia, where I met and later married my college sweetheart, Lil. We usually sit every Sunday about the middle part of this side of the sanctuary, right in front of Ann and Ray Valor. Ray and I have known each other for 40 years. We're both retired obstetricians. When Lil and I came to Phoenix, we were under the influence of German customs in the Lutheran church. And we ran into things that we'd never heard of before, like lutefisk and things like that. And we came to realize that Garrison Keillor was indeed correct when he said that a great deal of Lutherans are Scandinavians. Today's gospel talks about a man with a terrible disease and a wonderful cure. I want to divide my time this morning into two parts. One saying a little bit about the terrible disease, and the other describing God's healing in my family. I'm sort of like that healed leper of old. I want to tell you about these wonderful things. When you think about Jewish tradition, I'm always reminded of that wonderful Jewish milkman in Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye, who was always complaining about tradition. In fact, the dietary rules in Jewish life are so complex, I wonder how any Orthodox Jewish mother puts a kosher meal on the table. These rules are pretty much outlined in the first few books of the Old Testament. And they began really with very practical things. The ancients had no knowledge of germs or bacteria, but they were very observant. And they realized that if you ate wholesome, fresh food, you're less likely to get sick. If you washed your hands before you ate, you're less likely to get sick. So the ancient Jews really wrote the first book on sanitation and public health. They had a very interesting idea about infectious disease. When a family had measles or mumps, they were simply isolated or quarantined for a while until the illness went away. And at the end of the illness, they were accepted back into the community. There was one disease, however, that did not go away, and that was leprosy. We know now that leprosy and tuberculosis are very closely related bacteriologically. But the reason that they didn't isolate people with tuberculosis is you couldn't tell somebody had tuberculosis. When you had leprosy, you had lesions on your skin, and your face later on developed a funny leonine appearance, so that lepers were really pretty easy to identify. They were forced to live in isolated communities because leprosy didn't go away. It killed you after a long, slow process. They were forced to wear distinctive dress, and when they ever came in contact with non-infected people, they were supposed to say, unclean, because the ancient thought of how you got leprosy was through filth and contagion. We are very lucky to be alive at this particular point in history. Now, we're talking about a miracle that happened 2,000 years ago. But if you can imagine, no one knew about germs until the late 1800s, when Louis Pasteur showed us that germs cause disease. In the early part of the 20th century, Robert Koch, a famous bacteriologist, showed us that specific germs cause specific diseases. Now, think of what's happened in this last 100 years. World War I, we had one antibiotic, sulfanilamide. At the outbreak of World War II, penicillin was discovered. Look what's happened in that intervening time. These last 60 years have produced a plethora of wonderful, life-saving, misery-saving antibiotics. We can now cure both tuberculosis and leprosy. There's a lot more tuberculosis in the world than there is leprosy, simply because over the centuries, lepers have been so isolated. In 2007, there were 375,000 new cases of leprosy in the world. And if you can believe it, the place with most leprosy in the world is Brazil.